So, good evening, good morning, wherever you may be, streaming to you from the East Coast to the left coast and around the world on UCY.tv. This is All Things Apocalyptic with your host, G. Michael Hopf. Well, before I get going, I understand there is some birthday wishes, and that is the big second birthday to UCY.tv. So, to Jules, happy birthday. So, it's been another week and another series of crazy stuff going on around the world. I know, especially crazy for me. I've got two little kids, and they start school tomorrow. Stuff that's going on over there in the Midwest. So whoever's out there, if you're there on the scene, kind of getting the ground truth, be safe out there. Of course, we got more airstrikes against ISIS in Iraq. Everyone's, I'm sure, quite aware of all that. And something that didn't hit the news. I saw kind of a quick snippet of it on the news. Was I guess there was a Russian convoy that was destroyed as it entered in, or that it was traveling in Ukraine. So that was kind of interesting. I don't know if that's some kind of a false flag thing by the Russians so they can have a real reason to go in there and invade, but we shall see. And then the biggest thing for me, which was truly the sign it's the end of days, was Justin Bieber did the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. That definitely is not good. That shows that definitely the world is coming to an end. But in typical Bieber fashion, apparently he used no ice. So anyway, I wanted to discuss something that seems to have been lost, or it's kind of not getting the attention it had been, and that's kind of the Ebola outbreak in Africa. I know it seemed like, was it a week ago or even 2 weeks ago, it was all over the news. You couldn't, it was everywhere. You couldn't turn on the news, you couldn't turn on the internet and see it somewhere, everyone talking about the Ebola outbreak, and specifically the 2 Americans that got brought back to Atlanta, etc. But that's now seemed to kind of just waned. And what's interesting is still kind of going strong over there. I was checking out some news today about it, and right now, to date, there's been over 1,200 deaths from the outbreak in West Africa. And it just doesn't seem to change. But the news cycle here has changed. It's probably because of everything that's happening in Ferguson, Missouri. But what's interesting, they can't seem to get a handle on what's happening there, and the death toll is rising. It's there was an article I just read, I think it was a UK Guardian, something about just 86 confirmed deaths in the last 3 days. So what's funny about that? So when I read that today, I was like, wow, that's a lot of death. And then I started to ponder this whole outbreak over there, and kind of the fear that I know that probably many have, and about pandemics, because for me, if out of all the type of apocalyptic type of scenarios that can exist, from EMPs to nuclear wars, economic downfalls, etc., the pandemic is one that I'm actually most afraid of, because I think other ones are manageable. There's something about the pandemic that you can't escape from it in some regards. And you can't see it as well, and it can be there. And it also depends on what kind of virus or biological agent that might be floating around out there one day. To me, it's kind of a scary thing. You know, having 2 kids, having children at all, it's a scary proposition, just wanting to keep them safe. And I think knowing that there's disease, viruses out there that can't be controlled is frightening. It's definitely a frightening scenario. Versus, I think I can get my hands around kind of a civil unrest. I can get my hands around EMP goes off. I'm prepared. I'm ready to tackle that. A pandemic, it kind of freaks me out a little bit. So, but then I guess maybe it's my own kind of way of kind of making myself feel better. I started to think about just the numbers of deaths. Because you look at 86 in the last 3 days. If you average that out, that's not that many deaths per day from that. But yet, here we are, a lot of people are upset and concerned about it. But if you go and look at the number of deaths that happen every day as a result of an infection, I'm talking like staph infections that you get when you go to the hospital. So you go to the hospital for breaking an arm, and next thing you know, you've got you get an infection, and next thing you die. There's 99,000 deaths per year from infections caught at the hospital. That comes out to, do the math, 271 people per day dying from going to the hospital and catching an infection once they're there. But that doesn't really make a lot of news. It doesn't get the attention like the Ebola outbreak. And maybe that's just because Ebola is something that comes up now and then. Maybe it's the severity of how you die. Or it's just, for whatever reason, it just sounds, it frightens people. Of course, it's happening over in Africa, and then the thought of it getting here, I think that's what scares people. And the fact they really don't have a cure for it, or that's what they say. So I just wanted to kind of bring that up. It did kind of ease my fears in some regards, knowing that if you especially if you go on the CDC's website, you see of all the deaths, all these different incidences and all these different diseases or whatnot that take Americans out every single day. Ebola definitely is at the bottom of the list. So now that I have everyone's attention as far as it pertains to pandemics, I want to dive a little bit deeper into the possibilities of a worldwide pandemic. Even though I kind of dismissed it there, I still believe that it's a possibility. If you go back to the early part of the 20th century, we had the Spanish flu, and it wiped out a lot of people. Something like that today would be very, very bad. And to say that is it a possibility? Of course it is. Will it be Ebola? I don't know if it's going to be an Ebola type thing, but unless that strain mutates. So with me tonight, I decided to. I've been wanting to talk about this, so I actually kind of waited. I wanted to talk about it last week, but I had Angry American on. But I've got a very special guest on tonight to talk about pandemics, talk about that type of apocalyptic scenario playing out on us here. He has a storied and accomplished background. He graduated the U.S. Naval Academy in 1993, receiving a Bachelor of Science in English Literature. From there, he served the next 8 years on active duty in various Navy and Marine Corps units. From leading visit board search and seizure operations as a boarding officer in the Arabian Gulf to directing close air support as a forward air controller assigned to special Marine Corps units. His in-house expertise with a wide variety of regular and elite military units brings my next guest. He has a unique authenticity to everything he does. Having served his country and done his time as a total badass operator, he is here to discuss pandemics, his best-selling post-apocalyptic books, and, of course, all things apocalyptic. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Steve Concully. Steve, are you there?
I'm here, thank you. Yeah, I'm not angry, but I'm just disgruntled, so kind of downgraded from your last guest.
So I really appreciate having you on. I understand you were on this morning with Lori from Prepper Chicks, and right. So it's almost as if, and I hear you're going to be on a little bit later on Prepper Chicks After Dark, so you're kind of taking over UCY.TV today.
I know, three of the 24 hours.
I tell you, you're like the man of the hour here, aren't you? The man of 3 hours, apparently. So I kind of give a brief. Tell everyone that's listening out there a little bit about yourself.
All right, so you hit on the high points. I spent 8 years on active duty doing I was very fortunate. I saw a lot of different things, and I did a lot of different things. Very regular stuff. You say operator, and that's definitely probably a stretch of beyond what I did. That term being reserved for a very elite few. But I did get to work with a lot of those people. So. Army, Air Force, every branch of service. So it was awesome, and I'm grateful for that opportunity. When I left the military, I actually ended up working for Pfizer Pharmaceuticals. So when you look at my first book and the character and the topic, those lent very well to that. I spent another 8 or actually 12 years with Pfizer studying medicines, flu. Every different type of disease state. So I had a pretty solid background in medicine as well.
Well, you kind of jumped because I was going to ask you. So your first book. Why don't you introduce everybody to that? Because that's kind of something I want to talk about. Because your first post-apocalyptic book essentially deals with a type of flu, correct? Right.
Yeah. So I basically I took a little bit of literary license and I upped, kind of created a super flu. Not not something like in the stand, one of those, not a 99.9% fatal flu, but an enhanced, pandemic grade flu, like Spanish, basically like the Spanish flu, but a little more lethal, a little more contagious. I kind of had to play with the numbers to make it, impactful, because when you really look at the numbers, case fatality rates for these pandemic flus, it's really low. And kind of like you were saying, on the grand scale of worries, not that 50 to 100 million deaths in the world like they had in 1918, 1919 is nothing. That would be severely impactful today. The chance of dying from something like this is actually pretty low. So I bumped it up, and I did something different. I took a family, instead of having the CDC epidemiologists running around the world chasing down leads and finding the antidote. I kind of settled in on one of my biggest fears, which is just protecting my family in something like this. So I brought it into one house, a little claustrophobic. Some reviewers had a little trouble with that, readers, but really just kind of focused on what would I do as a father, as a husband, how would I handle something like this when the world is basically falling apart around you?
I know my little monologue. I was talking about fear, and I'll just repeat what I said. Even though the chances of getting something or dying from something like that is actually slim, but I don't know what it is. There's definitely a fear about that. And for me, it's just because I can't see it. I can't. Yeah. It's like it's right there. If an EMP goes off, the power's just out. Now you're just worried about two-legged creatures scavenging and marauding and things along that line. But with a pandemic, you have a specific. If it's kind of a global, kind of a super flu, kind of like what you've created in your book. We're not only now fighting the two-legged critters, we're also having to deal with the disease at the same time. And I think that's what's frightening. You have a multitude of forces that you're trying to protect your family against. So was it your background or your career at Pfizer that kind of led to you wanting to create an apocalyptic scenario based on a pandemic?
I wouldn't say it was my career, but it's one of my favorite books in the past, non-fictional books, was The Hot Zone, which was about the first Ebola outbreak. I can't remember which years, which pales really. I mean, when you look at it numerically, it pales in comparison with what's happening right now. And that book was terrifying. Utterly, just the descriptions of what happens to people that catch Ebola and bleed out and turn. I mean, it's just horrible. And I think that's one of the biggest fears with Ebola we have right now is not perishing from a pandemic or a seasonal flu is anything a wonderful ride at all. I mean, that's still a horrible death as well. But the Ebola really just kind of brings kind of a visceral response. But I just having that medical background, I created a character that was a pharmaceutical rep. After he had left the Marine Corps. It was a great it was just like almost a perfect storm combination of character. I just felt right at home writing him, which is important when you're designing a fictional character.
So, as far as the research you did on it, I mean, what level of research did you do? Who did you interview? Who did you talk to specifically about superflus or pandemic or viruses and whatnot?
I did way too much research. So, knowing what I know now, especially for, the books I write, I mean, I kind of entered a research paralysis mode where, I was just, I was kind of putting off actually writing this story, but I did a lot. I mean, scouring the internet. I have a few friends, through my contacts at Pfizer with physicians, a number of people in infectious disease, immunology. So I was able to dig even deeper with them and talk about, the realities of the system, and I read through just countless manuals. The government put out like a 500-page pandemic response booklet or whatever you want to call it, whatever they call it, op order. I'm sure out of those 500 pages, most civic planners have read like 3 of them, and it just there's just an amazing amount of information out there, but I just don't get the grand feeling that a lot is being done.
Oh, that's interesting. That brings me then to, what do you think are the chances of a type of superflu or an Ebola mutating, becoming airborne, is based on your research?
Yeah, so Ebola, I think you kind of hit it. You hit the right say tone. I mean, in terms of it seems like a big deal, but I mean, you're looking at 1,300 deaths, and this started. I think the first couple cases were detected in March. They were probably going on a little earlier than that. 1,300 deaths in however many months, in probably the most. I mean, if you're going to launch a virus or have something go haywire, I mean, Central Africa is the place to start. I mean, really. I mean, it sounds kind of, sounds terrible, but the healthcare system is in shambles, crowded. People kind of have strange concepts about what causes and how diseases spread. I mean, I read one report where villagers think if you say the word Ebola, it'll appear and manifest in the village. So you're dealing with, if something's going to go and spread, it's going to be there, and it really hasn't, because Ebola is just, it's on the grand scale of diseases, it's not that contagious. It's difficult to spread, whereas influenza and things like the avian flu, swine flu, those spread very quickly and very efficiently. Fortunately, they don't spread from human to human very efficiently, and that's the biggest mutation that we really have to be concerned about. Avian flu, I mean, I think the percentage is it's 70 to 80% fatal, and it's pretty much confined to Southeast Asia. If that were to become efficiently human, transferred efficiently from human to human, we'd have a big problem. I think that would be the beginning of a wide scale pandemic and a real problem.
I think I had first had that same kind of. That's why I mentioned the numbers about the staph infection killing many more people than Ebola, because I just think that it's, unless it mutates, and that's why I mentioned that. Unless if somewhere along the line that strain mutates and becomes something else, then I think we're in a world of hurt.
Right.
And the same thing goes with the flus you were mentioning. What about MERS and SARS? Where do you put them on the scale of possibly being pandemic type?
So MERS, MERS, I don't know so much. I wouldn't classify it. SARS is actually very unique. That had a very I'm trying to think the term for it, not replication number, but its transmission number was very high. It's actually very high compared to an influenza type virus. So SARS had the potential to really take off, but and frankly, I don't know why it didn't. I'd like to say it's because we have an efficient healthcare system, and hopefully we do. Hopefully, some of my pessimism is unfounded. But and MERS, it's once again, it's not designed as a contagious like a vector driven type of virus. Things like smallpox are even more, extremely virulent, extremely contagious. There's a number of viruses out there that are primed and ready to go, but we pretty much kind of knocked off the face of the planet.
Yeah, well, what are your thoughts then on vaccines for those drugs? I know that vaccines have become very, very controversial in the past decade. There might be people listening that think all vaccines are horrible, and there are other people that are listening that think the vaccines have been very, very helpful. It's really become a very controversial, almost political hot potato in some regards. Looking at vaccines, what's your thought on them? What is I'm sure Pfizer was always working. Pfizer was always working on certain things, as well as other pharmaceutical companies. Do you think that they're working somewhere? So there's some scientists in some lab right now working on vaccines for MERS, for SARS, for these types of diseases that exist right now?
I would really hope so. The problem, and I researched vaccines pretty extensively because it really kind of figured in and played into the book, to the Jakarta pandemic. The problem with vaccines is if it's something that's already been out there, like H5N1, the avian flu, or H1N1, it may mutate a little bit. You may see a different strain, but they've really kind of cracked the code to say that, and that's kind of a real like crude. If I was talking to someone who does this for a living would kind of be shaking their head at me, but they've more or less cracked the code. The real problem is if something unique or novel comes out. So like an H16N1, that I think I use that in my book because that strain of flu virus hadn't been discovered yet. Something like that, it starts everything over from scratch. So you could be looking at anywhere from 6 months to a year before an effective vaccine is created, and then you have mutations. It's tough. I mean, look at every year in our country. I know the statistics really well for that. Seasonal flu. You're talking about a killer. I mean, staph infections kill more actually than seasonal flu. But during peak flu season, like January through April, 800 people per week die in our country. And these are 2009 or 10 statistics. That's a lot of people. And, we have a vaccine, or supposedly do, a flu vaccine. They try to predict what's gonna come here, what the new strain's gonna be. So vaccines are tough, and they're definitely it's not a cure-all. It can be very helpful, but, the possibility, the likelihood of, waiting around for a vaccine is probably not going to be the best strategy because you're going to be waiting around a long time sitting in your house.
And then comes down to the how do they distribute it, how do they get it out, and specifically if you look at it kind of if it goes national or global, and our system will eventually collapse in itself. Then and then trying to distribute it would be that would just be problematic.
Right, and all the vaccines, when you look at it at the pandemic plan, it goes to the top tier people. There's at least 100 tiers of people that are more important than you and I in terms of getting that vaccine, and rightly so. Police, you have everything, all the infrastructure folks. So it's.
Don't tell that to my wife because she thinks she's at the top of the list, man. So
she is. So is my wife. She's at the very top.
What do you mean they're not coming here? And how come I'm not getting mine?
Honey, get out there and get out there.
Exactly.
Yeah. I can see it happening. Yeah.
Based on your research and based on your background, what are your thoughts, or what projecting out? Do you think that we will have? Because again, I always think that it's not a matter of if, but when. Do you think that as well with some kind of a large scale type pandemic?
I mean, statistically, historically, I think yes. 1918, the Spanish flu was definitely the last biggest, worldwide pandemic. We've had a number of pandemic type flus, and they've been declared pandemics since then. Small stuff you've never heard of, all over the world, and the numbers, the case fatality numbers, just they weren't high, but these were flus that they determined, and SARS is included in that. For whatever reason, fortunately, we just haven't had anything really take off. But I mean, we're ripe for it. I mean, you think in 1918. I was just looking at this the other day because I wrote a primer, for my this collaboration I'm working on. They estimate that 500 of the 1.8 billion inhabitants of the Earth were infected with the Spanish flu, and it went everywhere. They found native Alaskans were infected. People on remote islands in the South Pacific were infected. It got everywhere, and that's when I don't. Did they even? What did they have in 1918 to get around? I mean, I think most people traveled transcontinent by boat.
Yeah, it was all ships. Yeah, there weren't.
Now,
now
you can get on a plane in Africa or Europe and be in the States, within 6 to 7 hours. So. It's a new game. Something big comes out, it's going to spread, and it's not going to be pretty. I mean, I just hope our healthcare infrastructure can handle it, and I'm not exactly hopeful about that.
Well, that's the reason that, like, if you look at staph infections, the fact that you go to the hospital with a broken arm and end up dying from a staph infection type thing,
crazy,
is what that actually shows that the hospitals aren't necessarily prepared for something along that line. The fact that they can't, the environment can't be sterilized or clean, shows you that the hospitals will also be a breeding ground for it.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. Although, I have seen some very positive examples. One of them happened actually in my hometown of Munster, Indiana, of all places. I saw it on the news, and I'm like, wait a minute, that's community hospital, and it was had nothing to do with the Ebola virus, but it was some other kind of very I wish I could remember it off the top of my head. Very deadly and transmittable disease, and they identified this guy, and he had been traveling, and it came from Africa. Again, for some reason, it all seems to come out of there, and but they locked him down. They put him in airtight rooms, negative pressure and all that stuff. It's amazing how they actually did very well with that, and a couple other hospitals did the same. So I'm hopeful in that aspect that they'll be able to maybe possibly contain patient zero, but once again, we're looking at the castle, what I call the castle doctrine. I mean, it has a lot of different meanings, in firearms, and but I always look at it like, okay, so you build a castle wall, and as long as nothing gets through, you're fine. But something always gets through. You can, I don't think there's been a castle in history that has never been compromised. And once you get through, it's all about what you have on the inside to deal with the threat. And that's, like I said, I mean, that's where I'm the most worried. Once it gets through and in, then are we ready? Are we ready to respond to this? That's where I think we fall short in this country.
Well, and that's what's frightening as far as if you look at our southern border being so open and so porous that
right.
Somebody could easily, especially if they take something and they weaponize it,
sure,
and then they just walk across the Rio Grande and here they are. So where our airports seem to have, the customs and border control at the airports seem to be fairly tight and working. Our southern border is just wide open. It's like you fly in here, it's a little more difficult for you to get in, but otherwise, but you fly into Tijuana, you can just walk across. So that's what worries me. Specifically where I live, I'm the international border is only about 40 miles south of me, so I do get concerned about that. Who knows what's coming across? Who knows what kind of contagions are coming across? And there's no doubt in my mind that something or things have come across before. They just haven't taken off or whatnot. And I don't know, but
the swine flu came. I mean, you remember I think it was 2009 around there. The swine flu. That really originated. It really kind of gained traction in Mexico. I mean, I can only imagine a number of people. I mean, hundreds of infected people made their way over here.
Oh yeah. So speaking of the Spanish flu, there was an article I saw recently. Maybe you can remind me. There's something about, or maybe you saw it. Something about some scientists had recreated the deadly Spanish flu. Was that a bogus thing, or was that real?
No. Well, that I didn't read that one about the Spanish flu, but I was about to. The covert operations series that I write, the Black Flag series, it centers around a designer virus created by a kind of an Russian scientist. But no, I do remember it was in the Netherlands. They had created and modified the avian flu, like the H5N1 flu. They had modified it and turned it into some uber contagious, for heavens knows what reason they did this and were allowed to do this. And it was funded by the NIH. That was the amazing thing when I found, dug into it more. And that was easy, anyone could find that information. It was an NIH sponsored effort. And they created this thing. And I think one of the scientists leaked it out. Like he had some ethical, problems with it. Thank heavens. But that's scary. I mean, they basically created an effective human, an effective form of H5N1 that can be transferred from human to human. Okay.
Yeah, why? Why would they do
Why
that?
would you do that? And, and then we have, NIH. Remember the articles about the NIH? They're finding like smallpox in like bottles in a storage room in an old part of the building. I mean, remember that they literally found like live smallpox, or they don't know if it was live, but it was like a vial, and like, I mean, this stuff is supposed to be in two places in the world, in Russia and the U.S. at CDC, and the other one's in Novosibirsk, which is like in Siberia, locked down under like tight, Spetsnaz and Delta Force level security, and it's just in a back room somewhere.
Yeah, I always think there's always two explanations for that. It's either it's done deliberately, or is this pure incompetence? But I can't think of anything else. I mean, it's done for whatever. There's a reason they were to do it. Now we probably would never find out what that reason is, or they're just. I mean, or if stuff's mishandled like that, it's just pure absolute incompetence, and there's been a breakdown in the system. And it's sad to think that way, but.
Yeah.
Of course. I mean, even whether it's, I have a very strong opinion that I think the government is incompetent on many levels out there. The larger the bureaucracy, the kind of the slower, the more incompetent it can be. But that also goes for even large corporations. I've found like you look at smaller companies, they're kind of lean and mean, but the bigger the company gets, the slower. It's a big, huge leviathan that just moves and lumbers along. And I think bureaucracies like that as well, but without the brain depository there, because they don't get the best and brightest, so to speak. So,
right. Well, that kind of it's funny you say that, because I was looking. People like really think about like the government's conspiring to have these grand plans about it, enslaving us, and as much as I part of me believes that to a degree. The biggest part of me is like they're not capable of it, but through their actions and whatever they're doing, it's creating the same condition. So that's a theme that kind of resonates throughout my books, because I believe this. I agree with you.
Yeah, I don't discount the fact that there are definitely an agenda sometimes that's out there.
Yeah.
There's an agenda that exists inside certain halls of government to do things. Disregard for our well-being. Using the American population sometimes as guinea pigs, I think, on experiments with chemtrails and whatnot. That I think absolutely exists. Whether they can actually pull off something, that's when I start to have doubt in them. They have, again, I just think it might be the will, but in some regards, I don't think they have the way. They can't even run the post office effectively. That's what kind of gets me as far as there might be. There's no doubt in my mind there are some nefarious characters. I just don't know if they can all work together. It's the conspiracy is so vast.
Yeah.
That it almost. I mean, I've been in military operations. You've been in military operations, and you get. Once that military operation, it gets so many moving parts, it's very, very difficult for it to work out. In fact, most military operations, there's always something that goes wrong.
Sure.
Something always fails. Something never, the sergeant over there doesn't exactly turn left when he's supposed to turn left. And so it's what sometimes I can see there are institutions, there are individuals that want to take over. I just think that they have a difficult time doing it, because I just don't know if they can orchestrate it.
I think that's the case. I mean, I think that's the case. Like I said, there's some funky stuff going on. There's no doubt about it. I mean, you can't. I deal with the FEMA camps in my Perseid Collapse series, but in a very different way than a lot of people do. And in my way is, they're there. The government is planning for these things, but I mean, we've all seen it. They could barely. I mean, Hurricane Sandy. I mean, they could barely run the couple thousand people camps they had going there. If you'd even call them camps. Same thing with Hurricane Katrina. I mean, so I kind of take that the incompetence and like grand plans, but inability to execute, and then. Like you said, in the military, you have good people. I mean, I firmly believe, everyone's heart's in the right place, and when the hearts are not in the right place, then that you have a big system in place like that's going to fail, and it's going to be used in a bad way.
I guess let's kind of switch up here, and I want to talk about what are your because I think this is a reality as far as weaponizing something. So if you've got some knuckleheads in Denmark. Right, with funding by the NIH, creating some super type flu, avian flu, right? Is that what you're saying?
Right. Yep.
Then, what's the chance that somebody couldn't get a hold of that in a private lab with some private funding and do exactly what they've did?
I mean, it would. I don't see any reason why they couldn't. I mean, they could. the core samples of that could easily be attained by just taking a trip to Vietnam or some of the countries. China might be a little more difficult to kind of pull that kind of thing off in, but it wouldn't be hard to actually find H5N1 in one way or the other, one form or the other, live, and recreate it. I think I'd be shocked if some of these radical countries were not working on this right now. I'd be utterly shocked if they weren't. And those viruses, so those are pandemic viruses, which, those are kind of untargeted. They don't target. So, you release that in the U.S. and, it's going to be in your country as well. So I think when you talk about designer viruses and weaponizing stuff, I think looking at things, kind of like a rabies, there's all kinds of different, bacteria and viruses out there that are, a little more targeted. They're not as contagious, but they can be put in water supplies, air supplies, and things like that. Food, ingested, and cause some real mayhem.
So if they're creating something like that, then they can also create a vaccine to protect them. So say if you do have a U.S. government institution that wants to not necessarily do this within the halls of government, but essentially create kind of a false flag or create. So what they do is they get it.
Sure.
They do it in some dirty lab somewhere, funded by them, but then it's deployed by some, and then they hand it off to some radical group, so to speak. Can they, at the same time, whether synthesizing this bioengineered weapon, to also engineer a vaccine for themselves?
It's not crazy. The Ebola virus is a tough one because they've been working on a vaccine, or some kind of cure for that, or a vaccine. They've been working on it for decades and they haven't made any progress. The influenza flu, I don't know if the mechanism is a little more simple, but why not? If you're working in the lab, you're creating this designer H5N1 virus. If you have it for 5 to 10 years, it doesn't take that long to create a vaccine, for something. So why not? I think that's that would make a great novel. I think you got something.
Well, the only thing, since you mentioned that, but no, it's not about me. Hey, but what's interesting about that? So, because then I can start getting my arms around something. Because if you're working for a government institution or some kind of black government kind of group that wants to take control. The problem I see about creating a pandemic is if you don't create the vaccine for yourself and for your followers or those people that are going to be with you, what happens then? You then become susceptible to dying as well.
Right.
And if you make it so lethal, it's kind of, again, like Stephen King in The Stand, where 99% of the people die.
Yep.
Then don't you subject yourself to that as well? And unless they're out to do it to. Like they don't care. They're kind of like a radical jihadist where they all want to die. They think the planet doesn't deserve, the human beings are scum and should be eradicated from the planet. But otherwise, if you have a plan for takeover and control, if you're going to use a bioengineered weapon or a virus, I would think you would want to make sure you do have something to protect yourself against it. It just seemed from a practical standpoint. If I were going to do this, that's what I would do. I want to make sure that my family and those around me and those that are going to be with me when we take over are protected. Right, otherwise, what's the purpose?
Right. So now I know your plans. So you got your family covered. And no, but you hit on something because I've read a book of a fellow writer, and he postulates designing a designer virus that. Attacks or doesn't attack based on coded DNA. There's so many different ways because these all these viruses. Everything that interacts with our body it's a DNA reaction. Some people get sick from things, some people don't. Some people get cancer. Some people do the same things. They smoke their whole lives and they don't. It's all DNA. So his thing, and then that's where it really gets kind of complicated and scary, where you could design something like almost an ethnic cleansing virus. Talk about like insanity and just something just unbelievably out there. But or code it to just certain types of people, even a very specific one. So you could have almost an assassination type of a weapon. So, yeah, I think it's possible, and it has to be done.
I agree with that. It's interesting you bring that up as far as coding it to DNA, because I think that is something that there is talk about. Groups out there doing that, and that actually I can see that. I think the technologies. I think we're there to do that.
Yeah, it's scary.
That is scary, isn't it? Yeah.
Thanks. No it's for me to worry about.
So, all right. So let's talk about preparing then. So,
Sure.
A pandemic's broken out. What do you do? What does your household do? What do you? I know you've written about it in your books, but
Right.
What's your recommendation to those listening? They can do in the event of a pandemic, say specifically a Spanish flu type, superbug, super flu, whatever comes about.
Right. So, I mean, the first thing is, mechanically, you want to detect. Obviously, you have to detect it and know what's going to happen. I mean, if you don't know what's happening, your kids get infected in school, or you get infected at work. It doesn't do you any good. Then you're in triage and survive mode at that point. So, kind of keeping an eye on. I watch. I do look at this stuff. CDC. I don't just rely on the news. I'm just not convinced that if something truly is coming at us, that it's going to be advertised. I mean, I just don't. I think the government has a lot of influence on media, and we see kind of what some groups want us to see. But there are other sources out there, and that's not an easy thing. Not everyone has a friend that's a infectious disease expert, like the character in my book. So detection, and then you have to kind of be ready. I mean, it kind of dovetails into most, I would say, prepper plans. You're looking at a time of isolation, self-contained, self-sufficient, and I say 2 to 4 weeks. And I'm looking at a regular pandemic, not a super Stephen King type of thing. I think if you can keep yourself in your house quarantined from people for up to 4 weeks, I think you'll weather the first wave of the pandemic. Then you have to get ready for the second wave, because pandemics unfortunately come in waves, and the first one's not always the most deadly. It's actually the least deadly, typically.
Really? So, actually touch on that a little bit. That's interesting.
Yeah. So it's kind of weird. You could have dozens of waves. Usually the first one is like kind of a warning, and there'll be a lot of casualties. It'll be bad. It's not going to be like a couple people. It'll be big. But the second one, for some reason, historically, Spanish flu was the case, and even all the smaller ones. The second wave, where it kind of washes through in the first wave, people get sick, people die, people get better. A good group of people build up an immunity, but it's still out there. Because we kind of go by hemispheres here, so. What happens in the northern hemisphere seasonally hits the southern hemisphere almost in the opposite time of the year. Pandemics don't always follow that, but it takes a while for it to go around the world and come back again. And when it does come back, it's about a 2 to 3 month period. They see historically. That second wave is typically the worst. So you got to be ready for at least 2 successive waves. Third, fourth, and fifth. At that point, they're not as bad. But if you survive the first and second, and you haven't been vaccinated, you haven't built up an immunity, so you're just as susceptible. So yeah, I recommend at least 2 to 4 weeks of supplies. You have to kind of think about maybe taking vacation if you really suspect this is going to be a big thing. Yanking your kids out of school. There's some tough calls to be made, just mechanically, and that doesn't include supplies and stuff that any preparedness wise you would have on hand. And the only thing different that you would have in the case of a pandemic, trying to enforce quarantine, which is not always possible. You probably have to go out for something. Is having some N95 surgical grade mask and gloves, hand sanitizer, all that kind of stuff to just wash yourself down, and being very careful.
So once you give everyone your address, so we know where to go to get all that when it all happens.
Yeah. Okay. It's what's the address in the Blues Brothers Wrigley Field? Hold on.
Why don't you tell everybody about your books, your book series that you have out there? Do you have one that's post-apocalyptic? Do you have one that's more of a techno thriller?
Sure.
Because we've got about another 13 minutes. So why don't you go ahead and just tell the listeners about your book series?
Gotcha. So the one we've been focusing on, the book is called The Jakarta Pandemic, and features the Fletcher family, Alex Fletcher and his wife Kate, and their kids, and their neighbors, and the interactions and mayhem that goes on in that neighborhood. It's kind of a two-stage threat. Him dealing with the neighbors and everyone else's lack of preparedness, and that's one of the. It's a huge. We could probably talk about that when I get through the book stuff, because I think it's one of the biggest and most underestimated areas of preparedness is dealing with other people. So once they do that, then you have people leaving the big cities, who start filtering through these nice neighborhoods, these nice suburbs, and having to deal with just some very nefarious type of people coming through and making themselves at home in his neighborhood. The series I wrote after that, so I took about a 2-year break to write the Black Flag series, which is a covert ops series. It's basically the Tom Clancy techno thriller, Brad Thor type series that I've always wanted to write. And I quit reading in the genre for quite a while and just wasn't happy with stuff out there. So I have some very gritty, gray area characters. We were talking earlier today about characters that don't fit the mold of the black and white hero, very anti-hero kind of guys, but they're true patriots. And when you read through the whole series, you really truly see that these men and women are, they're on the good side, although they may have no problem, taking a satchel full of money from the bad guys and keeping it for themselves, or doing stuff like that.
Is that a bad thing?
No. No.
That's a good question for out there for anyone's listening. I mean, the thing is, it's like, what if you were involved in some kind of an op, and say you'd taken down some kind of nest of terrorists, so to speak, and next thing there was a satchel with $1 million. Do you keep it, or do you turn it into your superiors? That's a good question. I'd like to see what everyone's answer is. But it just seems.
I know what my characters would do.
It's a lot of beer money, man.
It's a lot of beer money. Yeah. It's running a new covert program, money. So So when I finished that series, I wanted to get back into post-apocalyptic. So I started the Perseid Collapse series, which takes the same characters from the Jakarta Pandemic 6 years later, and throws all hell at them. A whole new scenario, not pandemic related. They take all the lessons learned. They made a lot of mistakes in that first book, by design. And they face this really kind of worldwide EMP. Even more though, it's a very complicated. I wanted to kind of come up with a unique threat. I had to include the EMP in there. I mean, that's kind of like who can't do that? You have to.
What's everyone doing writing EMP books?
You got to turn the lights out. You got to find a way to turn the lights out. I mean, that's just.
I know. What is it? What is that? I know. I have to say, you got to turn. You got to turn, and you got to make sure nothing works.
No, see, and I allow a good amount of stuff to work, but it's just enough to really, hamper everything. Yeah, so this character Alex Fletcher, his kids are in college. Another big, this kind of plays on some fears of mine. He's not too far away. I'm in Portland, Maine. The kids are in. One of them's in Boston, but now he has to go. He's on a mission. He has to retrieve his kid and bring him back to their kind of safe compound they've built out in the countryside of Maine. But you can imagine there's all kinds of insanity and threats that develop along the way and continue throughout the series. So I had a lot of fun writing that one.
Well, it's always fun, writing, creating these worlds, creating these situations. I was cruising your website today, and I know at the same time, because you've been a very successful self-published writer, and I think that is just amazing. I think I love that. I started out that way, and I noticed you give a lot of advice to writers that kind of want to start writing, and I applaud that. I think that's wonderful. I've never looked at writing as a competition thing. I don't think we're actually in competition with each other. I think writers should collaborate, work together, help one another, help promote each other's work. So often, you and I were talking today, so often writers think that I need to talk that guy down or that girl down because someone might buy their book. And it's like they treat books like they treat cars. And like you can only buy one. That's it. You can only buy one book 1 year. Which one is it going to be? And so I really think that I want to applaud you for that, for
Thanks.
for
Yeah.
wanting to help other writers and mentor them, and I think that's really so. Tell me a little bit more about that, because I know you blog about it and things like that.
Yeah, and there's some other people that really do a lot more than I do. I really focus on writing. But over the last year, I've had more time to do that. I've mentored. As soon as I announced that I'm quitting my full time job to be a writer, I think people like the light went on in their head. They're like, oh wow, this guy actually makes a living doing this. Well, I have a book in the closet or in the drawer. My hard drive's filled with 3 or 4 fantasy novels. So I get numerous requests from people I know and people I don't know, to help them out. Just baby steps. I'm long overdue for an encompassing blog post. Kind of a step by step. These are the basics, and then move on from there. I kind of hit topics like character development, and, stuff like that here and there. It's not as organized as I'd like it to be. But no, I enjoy it. I mean, it's just fantastic. When I published the Jakarta Pandemic on Amazon in 2010, the fall 2010, I had no idea. Honestly, I just thought I was just basically vomiting my book onto the thing and, whatever, I'll just keep selling pharmaceutical drugs for the rest of my life. I had no idea that would change everything. When I hear other people who've done the same thing, it's just fantastic. I mean, I love the life I have and doing what I can,
Oh, I agree. It's a great lifestyle, and we get to create worlds, we get to create characters. They do what we want to in those worlds. It's fun. I always I do at the same time where I obviously, and I get this from people where sometimes people go, that's not realistic. That would happen that way. Now, when it comes to the technical aspects of what I have in my books, and I know you do the same thing, as well, a lot of other writers do. They're pretty accurate. I mean, it's pretty much spot on.
Yeah.
But the fact is, like, the characters, we do have to constantly put the characters under threat and always have chaos. Otherwise, the story would be over. And that's why they're like, how can your character? He's always running into trouble. It's like, well, if he wasn't, there really wouldn't be a book then. And that's what I try to tell people. It's like watching a TV series. It's it's like if it was just a humdrum sitting around with the thumb up their ass every day, and then no one's going to watch that or no one's going to read that. And so you got to put your characters through harrowing situations,
right?
And it's never ending. It's relentless. But that's where you get kind of that creative license. But at the same time, you were able, for me, you're able to express lots of different scenarios, and using the character to deal with all those varying different scenarios in these type of post-apocalyptic situations.
Right. No, it's that's the best part of it. I mean, it's just sometimes I can't believe I get to do this for a living. I'm sitting here typing and blowing people up, blowing things up. I'm sure at this point the NSA and the government realizes I'm an author and I'm not trying to create a designer virus and launch it into a public water system and the countless other unbelievable Google searches I've entered over the last 4 to 5 years.
Oh my God, I had an uncle that was concerned for me. He goes, aren't you concerned? I'm like, they already know. I mean, come on, really? They already know. I mean, and what am I going to do about it? I mean, they're everywhere. In fact, everyone say hi to NSA tonight. Hi guys, how you doing?
Yeah.
I mean,
We're talking. Yeah, exactly. I'm sure we hit a number of key phrases that have.
They're tracking us right now.
Yeah, just the fact that you and I are talking is.
So we've got a few more minutes. Why don't you tell everybody where they can contact you, where they can get your books? I know you also got some audiobooks out there as well. I think you got your stuff adapted for audio. Where they can get all your stuff. Go ahead. Yep.
So I'm right now I'm exclusively on Amazon. So if you go on Amazon and type my name in, Stephen Konkoly, Konkoly, all my stuff will come up. Yeah, it's an audiobook, paperback, Kindle ebook. You can find it all there. You can also go to my blog, which is like my website blog. That's www.stephenkonkoly.com. You can hit G. Michael up for the spelling of that. I have to post it somewhere. It's a tough one.
Oh, let's just I'm going to jump on your side. Are you in the chat room right now?
I don't think so. How do I do that?
Oh, just go to ucy.tv /ATA, and then you'll see the chat room right on the right-hand side. I'm sorry, I should have told you about that.
Oh, no, I didn't.
And in there, you can I'll go ahead and just drop all your information in there right now.
Okay. Yeah, cool. Well, is that through Skype or no?
No, it's not. It's the UCY.TV website.
Oh, yeah, I'll have to log in. Yeah, I'm not on that, so I'll make sure I'm on that.
Well, when
yeah, and I interact with I love to interact with the readers or anyone questions about anything, prepping, books, anything at all. And best email to get me on that is stephenconkley@gmail.com. Very, very easy. I may not get back to you right away if I'm in my writing cave, but I do always get back.
Now I know you are. Are you working on any other new projects we should be aware of?
So I am. So I have a prepping book called Practical Prepping: No Apocalypse Required, which is a collaboration with Randy Powers. He's a preparedness consultant out of Georgia, and that should come out in late August. It's kind of I'd say a lighthearted look. At least my essays and my talk about different topics is a little more lighthearted. I like to joke around a lot, but I do weave it into a very basic, constructed, down to earth. Here's what I think you should focus on. And Randy he's the expert. He runs into a little more detail, so you'll probably learn more from him. But I look for that end of August, maybe early September. That should be out. Beyond that, I'm plotting out my next post-apocalyptic series. I'm going to write another covert ops book this fall, and a couple other smaller projects. So it's busy. Like you.
Can you? We've got about 1 minute here. Can you tell us a little bit about the new post-apocalyptic series? Anything?
Well, it's going to, from what I know right now, it's going to take place in California. So I'll probably take place in your neighborhood if I can figure out where you live. No, I am. I've always been fascinated by the drought and the kind of the economic impacts of that. So I'm looking at a kind of a fortress California, with desalinization plants. It's in a crazy kind of conceptual stage right now, but it's coming together, and I think it'll be a little more of a, like I would say, a Joe Everyman kind of book. I mean, my characters in the past. Alex Fletcher's a ex-military, kind of a highly capable guy. I think I'm gonna dial it down a little and just have someone who's a little more crafty.
All right, but hey, we're out. Everyone, thanks a lot. Thanks, Steve. Stay frosty out there.
Yep.